what is it? I don't care what it is. Jimi Hendrix, we're interested. When can you talk? Like
Yeah.
I get my emails and phone calls returned like within 45 seconds. It was hilarious.
It's funny, I say that same thing to artists now. We work with so many artists, and they're like, "How do you get, publications to pay attention?" And I say, "Well, depends on your name, because if I send an email with a certain band name, publications are faster to reply, right? Or even if they recognize the publicist."
Yeah.
Um, so when you're associated with Jimi Hendrix, that's definitely a helpful thing. Fun fact, I was in university and there was this guy who was bullying me. Sorry, oh my goodness, not university, middle school. So I was like 13, and
Yeah.
this guy was bullying me. I was a big guy, but I didn't have a lot of friends. Um, and I don't know, he was saying something about like a test score that had come back, and he's like, "Don't cry, Gonda, don't cry, don't cry." And it was just one of those days where I had enough, and I grabbed him by the shirt and I took him across the classroom and I smashed him against the blackboard. And I said, like, "Stop messing with me." And then I ran out of the classroom crying. But the point of my story
Yeah.
is that he was so freaked out that I stood up to him, and his mom was so pissed at him that he started to try to bribe me to say, like, to the principal, I'm in so much trouble. Help me out here. Help me out here. And he offered me $20, a Playboy, and a bunch of CDs. And in those CDs was the ultimate experience. And that was my entry into Jimi Hendrix.
Wow, crazy. So what incredible. So where do you live? Do you still live in Toronto? Where do you live?
No, I'm in Vancouver now. I lived in Toronto. I spent about 4 years in Europe and then eventually moved here afterwards.
I had a good friend, musician friend up there. I used to go up there and sit in at the Town Pump and other venues in Vancouver. So I almost actually moved there around 95, but I went up there to see about I had a job offer, so I went up there to do the in-person interview, and I
Hmm.
was just about made up my mind. It was a great job. My friend's band wanted me to sit in with them and all this other stuff. It was the day that Kurt Cobain blew his brains out.
Oh my God.
It was like, I don't know about this. And then we spent that weekend going to a variety of parties. And of course, the grunge scene, in Vancouver right then was all,
Hmm.
Nirvana were king. Everywhere I went, people were crying. It was this ugly black cloud hanging over everything. So I thought, I don't think it's gonna work. So that's when I moved back to San Francisco. I was briefly in LA for a couple of years for my corporate career. But I know Vancouver. It's a lovely place. Always liked it.
It's It's beautiful here. I mean, I love Canada in general. I've traveled, a decent amount throughout the US and other parts of the world. There's just something nice about the combination of the ocean and the mountains, the saltwater, fresh water. I don't think I could live in Toronto again. I love it here so much.
Yeah, and I thought, because I grew up in New Zealand. We'll get into this, my background and all later, but I grew up in New Zealand, and visiting after living in San Francisco many years, whenever I'd visit Vancouver, it reminded me of a combination of New Zealand and San Francisco because it was, like, founded about the same time, so it's got the same, like, Victorian architecture, but it's part of the British Commonwealth, so it always reminded me of, like, a cross between New Zealand and San Francisco.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. That
Yeah.
makes sense. When I was starting to prepare for our chat, this was the first time I've done about 55 interviews for this podcast series. This was the first time where the backstory and the history was so robust that I was like, okay, I cannot go through any more facts because I've already lost my talking points.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you Keith, do you identify more as a musician, singer-songwriter, producer, filmmaker, writer, or a published author? Like, is there a certain one?
You know what? I started off as a guitar player, that's all I wanted to do is learn the guitar. My first instrument was bass, so I started off as a musician, but as you know, as somewhat a musical person yourself, these things evolve, and certain doors open and you realize that you've got certain talent in other areas. Primarily, I'm a singer-songwriter and a record producer, and being a good songwriter means I'm somewhat literate, so I've been
Mhm.
able and I've had quite a few amazing life-changing events in my life, so I've been able to translate that into, like, books that I'm writing. Currently, I've got 2 Jimi Hendrix-themed books, as well as another book. When I moved here from New Zealand in 1985, I immediately got several record deals to release, like, very unique New Zealand recordings. So I've got another book about me and my business partner, Arthur West, in 1985, launching the New Zealand invasion of North America, where we were able to release the cream of the crop of the best New Zealand alternative bands. All of the records hit, all the records sold out, all the money got ripped off.
Man.
And you know what the music business is like. We're talking about '85 to, like, '88. That's
Yeah.
before CDs, never mind downloading and streaming. If you were an independent record company, you had to manufacture the records, you had to promote them, you had to get them in the hands of the record distributors, and
Mhm.
then if you had a hit record, all the records would sell, and then the independent record distributors would just keep all the money. And
Yeah.
you're a big rock star and you've got these hit records, and now you gotta hire lawyers to go after some guy in Michigan that owes you 900 bucks, you know?
So I mean, you've obviously seen so many different periods within the music industry. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just old enough to remember my parents, like, putting on vinyl, but then when I really got into music, it was cassettes, and then I was there for the transition from cassettes to CD, and CD was king for a couple decades, and then Napster happened, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But do you think that, what you just commented on, do you think it's because the deal structures changed or that people were just easier to take advantage of, like, before the CDs, world? Like, how did it transition on a business/legal side?
You know what? It's always been, it's the entertainment business and specifically it's the record business. It's always been completely corrupt. But nowadays, with streaming and metadata attached to your digital files, at least there's some semblance of how you can track this stuff or compute sales or figure out who's got their fingerprints on the musical files.
Mhm,
So I don't think, the deal points in the contracts are obviously a lot more complicated now because they also involve digital streaming and performers' rights. But you know, back in the vinyl days, hard copy of a record, you're at the hands of these record distributors. And let me tell you a little bit about Sam Phillips. You know, Sam Phillips from Sun Records, the guy that discovered Elvis Presley and Roy
mhm,
Orbison, Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash and Howlin' Wolf. Interesting story with him. And this is an analogy for everybody out there in the pre-streaming days who had set up an independent record company. You set up a independent record company, you've discovered, let's say, Elvis Presley, and next thing you know, you got a million selling hit on it, out of that. You've you're you as the record company, you have to manufacture the million records. You give them to the distributors. It's all over the radio. It's a massive hit. They sell all the records. They're going to keep your money unless you have another hit that they need. So it's like a bait and switch. You can't afford to even pay for your next artist until you get paid back. But if you've got another hit up your sleeve, then the dirtbag distributors will pay you for the first one in order to get the second one. And let me tell you, Sam Phillips, the reason that he had to sell Elvis Presley's contract to RCA is because he was going bankrupt because Elvis Presley had like a 3 million selling hit. The first couple of songs were million selling hits. He was on the hook to pay for the manufacturer and the distributors weren't paying him. So he
mhm,
has this roster including Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Howlin' Wolf, Carl Perkins, all these guys. His label's going down the tubes because he's had the misfortune of having a huge multi-million selling Elvis Presley's single. So in order to not go bankrupt, he has to sell Elvis's contract to RCA for $45,000, and it was that $45,000 that he then invested into Sun Records, which then helped float the whole label to make stars out of Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Roy Orbison. That's
That's
how it works, and guess what? That's exactly what happened to me and my partner. We
that's
had these
insane.
hit we had these hit records as the record owners, and these weren't even CDs, this is before that, this is in vinyl. We had to pay for the vinyl, we had to do the promotion, we had to get the records and the product into the hands of the distributors. They were all hit records. They all went National College Radio Top 10. They all sold out and they all kept the money. Have a nice day.
It sounds like the hardest part about contracts back in the day is that everything was done paper and pen, right? So everything is a ledger. It's so easy to change things that way and hide things. Um, is it harder to hide things now? Like, is the industry just as corrupt, but it's harder to hide things because things are more digital?
No, exactly. And you made a really good point. Not only was what I'm describing before the digital streaming days, this is before email. It was all snail mail. You know, if you were some program director in Toronto, actually, we had these huge hits in Montreal with, all of our records went to number one immediately. It was almost like the Beatles. I'd produced this album with 12 of the top New Zealand artists at the time,
Mhm,
around 1986. They sent me the top 20. The album was number 1. The top 20, the top 12 songs were my songs from my album, and so that was a really good experience, but yeah, there wasn't even email, so, again, coming down to accountability with the digital era, I can send you an email and you can read it in 30 seconds, right?
mhm.
Same with a digital stream. I can say, "Hey, I got this new hit single. You wanna listen to it?" "Sure." Boom, there you go. You get to hear it. There's a paper trail. So it's not so much the content of the contracts, but just the way all of technology has changed that same changes society. So it's all a lot more immediate. But again, the music business being what it is, if people see an advantage, they'll take it. And I'm not sure how much of, my musical resume you've seen, but I've said to my business partners, "You really know you've made it when you start getting ripped off like this." Like the story that I just said before, it's like, great, I got off the boat from New Zealand in 1985. Within 2 years, I've had 5 United States National College Radio Top 10 records. All the money got ripped off. All of it. So I've
That
really made it, man. I'm a rock star, Chris. You want my autograph?
absolutely.
There you
So
go.
the mark of success is how often you get ripped off.
Yeah. Well, that's how you know. Let's face it. If you're a high profile artist and you're not getting ripped off, then you probably don't really have much of value that anybody really wants. It just, it's the nature of capitalism and commercialism and, it's the music industry. So,
Yeah. So that I mean, I don't disagree. There's a lot of bad that comes with entertainment, and we're seeing more and more of that come out now, which I think goes back to the point of conversation about technology, revealing things, but it hasn't always been all bad.
right.
It's that have had monumental success. I mean, like famously Prince, right? I'm keeping my masters. I'm not giving those away. He was the one of the big outspoken critics for the masters. Give me some of the more positive things that you've seen throughout the industry earlier on.
Well, like I said, I grew up in New Zealand. My father was in the Marine Corps for 27 years. I grew up in Southern California on US military bases at the height of the Vietnam War. And when my father came back from 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, he couldn't stand the Vietnam War protests, so we moved to New Zealand. So I went as a young kid, I moved to New Zealand. I went to school there. I became a touring professional musician there. And being in a place like New Zealand, it's got a population of like 4 million people. So if you're in one of the top 10 bands or so, whenever a huge act, Talking Heads, Pretenders, Psychedelic Furs, Simple Minds, what have you, comes through and does a New Zealand tour, the top 10 bands get to open for these bands. So I had a lot of early experience. I'm talking about in my early 20s playing music festivals in front of 60,000 people and opening for these huge bands. So that was like a microcosm in of the New Zealand music scene. Again, I've written a book about that too, and what happened when I moved to San Francisco and released the cream of the crop. But that's a good example of some early success. But that was based more or less on my where I was geographically. But
So do you think sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
no, yeah, and just furthering on that, after I'd come to San Francisco and release all these hit New Zealand records, I then joined a really good, San Francisco-based group called, the Ophelias. We were signed to Rough Trade. That's a big deal. Rough Trade were a huge
Mhm.
independent in the '80s, but guess what? The same thing happened to them. They sank all of their budget into the Butthole Surfers. Sorry, excuse my French, but that's
It's
the name.
okay, I know the band, it's all good.
No, and that's the name of their band. They sank every cent they had into them, and it didn't work, and the whole label collapsed. So that was another example of doing what good musicians do. You write good songs, you produce good records, you get a record deal, you get a hit, then you go on tour, and you're doing all the right things, but there's point I'm trying to make is there's really no guarantee of any of it. And
Mhm.
depending on who you are and what your band is or what sort of music you play and what the circumstances are with the business people you're dealing with, this can go sideways very quickly, as you
Yeah.
know.
And that's kind of, I think, where I'm going with this line of thought is, we talked about a lot of the things that can go wrong. You've mentioned some of the bad things that have happened or that you've seen happen. I want to know about some of the positive things simply because what you're now doing with this current case, with this current lawsuit against Sony, is positive in its nature in that you're trying to do the right thing. And you're
Yep.
not the only one that's done that. So have you seen other people before you try to level the playing field, so to speak?
Not that so much, but you've hit on a really good point, and I'm so glad that you zeroed in on this. I never got in me and my business partners. And just to, engage the listener, my business partners and I, we formed a company that includes the, estates of Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, who are the rhythm section of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, okay? And the reason that came about is because I had met Noel Redding in 1995, 1996, and I toured with him. I was his manager, band leader, and producer for several years. So to get back to your point, I never started this company to think, "Oh, wow, I'm gonna be a big shot, I'm gonna make $3,000,000." It's like, we did not get involved in this for the money. We got involved in this to do the right thing because being a Jimi Hendrix historian, and, big collector, I knew, all along how badly Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding had been defrauded over the years, so and they both ended up dying early in near poverty, drinking themselves to death because they happened to be in a band that sold 100 million records and they got virtually nothing. So that's a perfect example of you can do all the right things. You can form one of the biggest bands in the world. You can sell 100 million records and you get screwed over. So, more to your point, I got involved in this to do the right thing, to try to get not only their Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding's heirs their share of what they should be getting, but just to really not only correct the historical wrongs, but to make a statement to the industry. And when my company, when we started this, me and my wonderful partners, we knew that this is gonna be a big thing because it's obviously, it's the Jimi Hendrix catalog. This is one of the most iconic catalogs of all time.
Mhm.
These core records. There's like 5 or 6 of these core records. They've never gone out of print. They're never gonna go out of print. 50 years from now, some 12-year-old kid's gonna pick up a guitar, and what is he gonna do? He's gonna go buy those Jimi Hendrix records. So, again, we knew that we were doing something very big, and it was gonna have a lot of impact, but as soon as we let the genie out of the bottle, it's like, "Oh, yeah, guess what? What we're going for is to restore Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding's not only their performers' rights, but their rights to digital streaming royalties. And guess what that means? That the performers' rights royalty stream only was made in law in England in 1988. And digital streaming, as you know, only started around 2001. So guess what? Everybody, any legacy musician who hasn't been paid before 1988 for performers' rights and digital streaming rights, if once we prevail, and we are cautiously optimistic that we will, every legacy musician that hasn't been paid and has been screwed over by these major record companies and these digital platform streaming companies, they're going to come out of the woodwork. And if once we prevail in this case, this is going to set a precedent where guess what? They're going to have to address and perhaps rewrite hundreds, if not thousands, of contracts to cover all the musicians that haven't been paid, at least since 1988.
Yeah. I love that, and I'm happy for what you're doing. I'm always, championing the underdog and rooting for equality where possible. So there's, as you know, Sony's lead attorney had a quote, and it said, "If the claimants prevail, it will be the end of the music business as we know it, and will sow chaos throughout the industry." And when you don't have context, it sounds so horrible. But immediately I said, "Dude, it's the end of the music business written in a way that benefits you, not everyone else." So
Thank
what are you saying?
thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up. I was in London for the trial. I just got I went straight from Heathrow, and I went straight to the courtroom in London, and I walked in the room just when the trial was starting, and the Sony attorney gave that speech, and we just looked at each other and went, "Hallelujah. End of the music business as they know it." As they know it. And as you can imagine, I've lived here in San Francisco for like 40 years, been a professional musician for 45 years. Most of my friends are musicians. When they're reading the press releases and the, social media posts saying this will be the end of the music business as we know it, everyone's going, fuck yeah. Pardon my French, fuck the man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah. 'Cause something else that I've said in another interview, I know, like I said, a lot of my friends are musicians. I only know one guy that makes a reasonable, comfortable living out of being a professional musician, and I'm not gonna name his name, but most people out there that know me, they're gonna know who it is. He's one of the world's top 10 drummers. He's been touring. He regularly tours with A-list singer-songwriters, and that he's the only guy that I know that makes a reasonable living. I just got my BMI songwriting checks, Chris,
Mhm.
$92.18 for the quarter.
Royalties.
Yeah, the one before that was like $74. The one before that was like $32.16. So, I'm a songwriter. I look at these statements and it goes, "The good news, your wonderful songwriting is being streamed 262,000 times around the world. The bad news is here's your check for $41.16." But what
Yeah.
really gets me, I get do you get BMI or ASCAP, statements? Do you get those?
No, I don't, but I've been on the other end of that. I got a story for you for regarding SOCAN.
All right. Let me just finish this up. What what really gets me is I'm looking at these statements going, "Okay, I've just made $42.16 for the quarter," but it shows that my songs that I wrote or performed or recorded on, they've been streamed 251,000 times around the world. I have no idea who's doing that. Who's doing that? People in San Francisco that I know, they're not streaming my songs 251,000. Who's doing that? Is it on a radio? Is it on a TV show in Indonesia?
Yeah.
Y is it on somebody's podcast in Pakistan or Germany? I don't know. It just says international streaming, 262,000. It's like, I'm not I'm not doing anything to, propagate that.
There's so many things on the, other end that I think most artists are totally unfamiliar with that they need to be familiar with. What I worked at SOCAN for about a year, and, I'll never forget that it was pre-technology. I have no idea how things are happening there now, but the whole company, once a quarter, would get called into various lunchrooms and boardrooms, and it's because we had to manually stuff all the checks, the royalty checks, into envelopes, and it was broken down into, like, a letter, like, someone got some last names with the G, and then you stuffed them in, and I remember seeing Bryan Adams' quarterly royalty check, and I'm not gonna talk about the number or anything on there, but I
But you
saw it and
I bet he
someone
gets
stuffing it into an envelope and then licking it and mailing it out, and I'm thinking, "How did they even calculate this?
yeah,
How
yeah,
how does he even," and that's just one small micro layer, right? So A is how did the
yep,
terms get created? How was it calculated? Who is sending this? And this is just one small part of the bigger picture. I told you at the top of the call that I helped launch, run, and then shut down BlackBerry's a la carte music store, MP3 download store like iTunes. I know I did the deals. I know how much we were working with in terms of a profit margin. It was nothing.
yeah,
Most people don't even know how much the label and publisher take off the top,
yeah,
so let me ask you a question just because 'cause we're talking about this.
yeah, yeah.
Spotify is the enemy right now. They're the big bad enemy, but they're no different than all of the other
They're all
streaming
the same.
services.
Just
So
like the
who's
major record just like all the major it doesn't matter if it's Sony, it could be Universal or whoever, EMI, they're all the streaming platforms to me are as similar to each other as the major record companies. Go ahead, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. I appreciate that context, but, like, when you look at Spotify, and you and I probably have an idea of how those deals are structured, who is actually the bad guy? Is it Spotify, the technology provider, or is it the people that are licensing the catalog to them?
Yes. No, no, no. No, no, no. Let that I hate to use that tired cliche, follow the damn money. And when
Uh-huh.
you're talking about faceless multinational corporations, it's almost impossible to follow the money.
Mm,
So, you know, who knows? Because obviously those records and who gets paid and who controls it, it's all completely confidential. You
yeah.
know? So, who knows? But follow the money, but again, what we touched on earlier well, before I go into that, it's like when I first started I've had BMI 2 different BMI catalogs for the last, I don't know, 35 years, 40 years or so. And now with digital streaming, we touched on metadata, so there's actual data that's, embedded into the track. So if some radio station in Cleveland or a TV station plays one of my songs, the metadata will alert BMI or the record company or me or whoever it is that's in control of that piece of music, and that's one way of it being calculated. But before digital streaming and metadata came into effect, I got this workbook from BMI. You wouldn't believe the voodoo math involved. Okay. So BMI is, and ASCAP, they're supposed, this is for the listener's edification. Okay. They are supposed to track broadcast, uh, songs or recordings, not on behalf of the artist, but on behalf of the songwriters. Okay, and let's just say, how many radio stations are there in North America? 5,000?
Yeah, big
10,000?
number.
I don't know. I don't know. Let's just say there's 5,000. I remember reading this BMI workbook where it tried to explain their voodoo math. They would say out of 5,000 radio stations, it's and this is before digital streaming or even email. And, they would say, well, it's too hard for us to reach out to every 5,000 radio stations out there and get all of their playlists and to do all the calculations and then pay Chris $32 and Keith $71. So they would do this voodoo math where they would take a segment of the reports. These radio stations are supposed to report this information back to BMI and ASCAP, and because of the amount of radio stations and the time it would take, they would just calculate, okay, instead of 5,000 reports back, we've got 100, let's say we've got 500, and Keith's songs were played on 3 of those stations, so therefore, we're gonna times that by 6 and give Keith 18 plays instead of 6
That's
or
crazy.
3. And so it was this voodoo math, but that was in the old days.
Mm,
Right now, as you know, with digital streaming and, digital telecommunications, that information, especially with AI, should be easily or much more easily calculated, and people should expect to get what they're fucking owed, pardon my French. And
yeah.
that's the crux of our lawsuit. Musicians should get paid. They should. Why shouldn't me or you or Noel Redding or Mitch Mitchell, why shouldn't we not get paid what we are owed?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. If I had an employee and I have a contract with them and I said, "Listen, I'm gonna give you 17% of what I owe you this month," and then, like, uh, muddy the water so that they can't tabulate it, there'd
Yep,
be an uproar. So I don't know why it's happening with
yep,
musicians. I'm happy you mentioned AI because I not as a creative tool, but as a checks and balances tool,
yeah,
I feel like it's gonna really help to
yes,
take metadata, digital
yep.
information, and present it more easily.
Totally. That's a really good point. And when I first heard of AI, we'd hear these horror stories. Oh, I want to be a songwriter, so I'm going to punch this data into AI and I want AI to create for me the greatest Beatles song of all time with a Jimi Hendrix guitar solo in the middle of it. Da 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 da. Push a button, boom, there it is. There you go. You've now got a recording of the greatest song ever written by the Beatles, and Jimi Hendrix is guessing on lead guitar, or people that use it to help them write lyrics, or people that use it to help them write books. It's complete BS. But I gotta agree with you. Once I've delved more into AI for science and mathematics and algorithms, this is the shit. You can get valuable and accurate information from a scientific or mathematical perspective in a heartbeat, and
Yeah.
that's great. That's what it's like the supercomputer of the supercomputer, you know? That is where it's really valuable, and the music industry should be using that to help further musicians getting paid what they are owed.
Yeah, I mean, we at our company or companies use it as a research tool. It is so handy for deep research, and I've now heard through a couple people in the law industry in Canada that there are rumblings that the junior associates or whoever the people are that do the actual research for the lawyers, their entire industry or jobs are in jeopardy because we can leverage AI to do the same tool. So
Yep,
instead, we'll hire some more seniors to follow up on the actual
yep,
research. But like, it's crazy how much it can
yep,
pull back in such
yeah,
a short time.
totally. Speaking of AI, in your, in all of your free time, why don't you put into AI offline the details about our case? I'm not sure if you've done that.
Not yet,
Just
no.
as a AI exercise, and you have my contact details offline. why don't you put in the information that you know about our court case and read what AI puts back? Because just like how AI is great for mathematics and science, it's also really good at interpreting law and potential of court actions. And so you are going to be pretty shocked when you get the results back from that. Okay.
Alright. I wrote
Because,
I wrote it down, I'll check it out.
all right, cool.
But so, I mean, you've seen and done so much within your industry, and you at the top of the call, you even said, like, "I didn't anticipate where it was gonna go, I just was following the path," and now here you are, representing these amazing musicians and fighting the good fight, so to speak. What are things that artists now need to know to avoid this type of stuff? Should they stay independent? Should they leverage different tools? Should they avoid label deals, or are label deals still okay, but you have to be careful who you get into bed with? What's your opinion as a musician?
You know what? Right now, the music industry is so nebulous, and it's so it's neither here nor there. And again, every musician, if you sign to a record label, whether it's an independent or a major, there's no cookie cutter. This is your record deal. You get the same as everybody else. Everybody's record deal is different, has different clauses, different expectations, different
Mhm,
advances, different what have you. So there's arguments for continuing to try to be signed by either a major or an independent label, but those days are slowly fading away is because a lot of major labels, you could be me or you could be the new John Lennon writing all these great songs in the back room. Unless we have 140,000 Facebook or social media followers, they don't want to know.
yeah,
So there's arguments for going the traditional route and trying to be signed by a record company, but the alternative, and I've done this something else that I've done on a number of occasion, is that you act as your own record company. In other
mhm,
words, you put everything up on Spotify or Apple Music, but that also means that you're responsible for your own promotion and your PR, and that's a whole other Pandora's box because the last release that I did from my band, you're gonna love the name of my band, Chris. It's called the Great American Robber Barons. How about that?
I
For
have a note to comment on that.
how about that for the name of the guy who's taken on the music industry? If anybody's gonna take down the music industry, it's the Great American Robber Barons. So getting back to my point, when we put out our last, album as the Great American Robber Barons, I thought, "Okay, I'll do it myself," and I've done this a couple of times myself where and I'm pretty sure that you know this, you need to hire PR, like either
Mhm,
publicist or promotion, web and media-based publicist or promotion people, or radio station promotion people. And so you pay 4 or $5,000 for these campaigns, but what the last campaign that I was involved in, and I won't share the name of the digital PR company that led me through this, my job in a 3-month publicity campaign was to get on social media for 6 or 8 hours a day, liking and following as many people as I could, whether I liked them or hated them or what have you, with the idea being, if I follow you, Chris, you're gonna follow me, and if I sit there on social media typing away, liking hundreds and thousands of people, then they're gonna like me, and next thing you know, a record company is gonna see that I have 120,000 Facebook followers. Big deal. I did that.
wow.
You wouldn't believe the results I got from that. I got a few, I got some airplay. I got a few five-star reviews that I put in my file. I've had so many five-star reviews for my records, but again, did that translate into sales?
Mm,
If it did, I tell you another thing that it did, part of the PR campaign and the Publicists campaign was for me to put the album up on Spotify and iTunes, and just like I said before, within 24 hours, some streaming platform in Russia had stolen it, and they were selling the whole double album for 99 cents, and of course, I never saw a cent from those criminals.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like your point is valid in the sense that regardless of the deal, regardless of how you're doing it, the industry is difficult. So don't go in with rose-colored glasses. That doesn't mean that good things and good people don't exist, but you
Right.
have to be cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if you noticed this, like, coming back around to the case, but, have you heard that Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland have gone after Sting? Listen to this, and this is like a microcosm of how capitalism work. We're talking about the 1% at the top makes like 99% of the money, and the
Uh-huh.
other 99% of the people are chasing the 1% of the money, and so that's how that works, but every breath you take, Andy Summers came up with the signature guitar hook. Sting makes $750,000 a year in streaming royalties on that one song, and Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland get nothing. So
Wow.
they've taken Sting to court. You may wanna, Google search this when the program's over. They ended up getting $800,000 each from Sting, but that's for one song. Sting was
Yeah.
the main songwriter in The Police. You can imagine he's probably got about 10 more of those, at least, if not 20 more of those. Do the math. So he's making 10 or 20 million a year out of digital streaming. Andy Summers, Stuart Copeland, me, you, Mitch Mitchell, and Noel Redding are making nothing.
Yeah. It's it's so tough because as we've said, the industry has changed so much over the last 30, 50 years. And there's also so many different levels of people involved. You know, you don't know if it was the musician who was being nefarious or if maybe the manager was a bad actor and the
Yeah,
manager was trying to convince them. But
yep,
maybe it wasn't the manager, maybe it was the label telling the manager who was telling him, and the
yep,
manager was just as oblivious, which is why you need to understand the industry. One of the things that we do with V13 Music is we say that every artist needs to focus on music, but every artist also needs a team. And if you
yeah,
want to have a good team that is going to not screw you, not take royalties, not take, your IP and all that stuff, then as an artist, it's important to think of those things as a service-based industry rather than what it is now, which is like a venture capital industry. You can't
totally.
expect someone to just put money into a project and hope it sticks. You have to be willing to put your own money up and find a team that's going to bust their ass to give you good results. And I know that there's a million publicists out there that are doing, less than great work, but there's also lots of really good ones. So
Yeah,
spend the time researching the industry, knowing what these basic contract structures are, finding good people to work with, and then taking a chance on yourself. And hopefully you don't befall all this horrible stuff that could happen otherwise. I mean, you made me think of the Scorpions. I think it was the Scorpions' first 2 albums. Somehow the producer is the one making all the money off of the royalties,
yep,
because the band's not. It happens all the time.
okay. Yeah. Well, getting to your point, musicians these days, and like what I've just described, you you almost have to be your own record company, and by that, I mean, you have to manufacture the CDs or vinyl to sell at your gigs.
Yep.
You need to hire the PR company and the publicist. You need to hire all these people to make all these things happen, and you've gotta look at it. If you wanna be a professional musician and you want this to really go somewhere, it's like starting your own business. You're gonna start a restaurant? "Oh, I'm not gonna spend any money here, okay?" You know, I want somebody else to finance my restaurant. I'm not spending money to make money. And so, also, another point I wanna make, having grown up in New Zealand, which is a very, compact place, isolated place, so many musicians there, when I came to America and had all the success with these New Zealand records, they just, they just think, "Oh, you record an album and then you release it, and next thing you know, you're on 5,000 radio stations and getting five-star reviews all around the world, and it all just magically happens." And with young musicians as well, especially those listening to our show here, it doesn't all just magically happen, you know? It doesn't.
Yeah.
It's creating your own business, and you have to finance yourself at least to a certain level, or nothing is gonna happen. But there's also no guarantee. You can spend, like some of the examples I've given, you can go ahead and spend all that money, you know, making yourself out to be the record label as well as the artist, and there's still no guarantee that anything's gonna happen, but, that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. And change happens so frequent and so quickly that you have to either be up on it or again go back to a team of people that can be aware of these things and help you understand them. So I mean, I've been running a website for 21 years now.
Cool.
When COVID happened, all of a sudden I saw a huge influx of publicists that I've never heard before saying I'm pitching for these artists. I don't have a relationship with these people, but obviously a lot of people were working from home and looking for different opportunities because they got laid off, they're bored. But at the same time that there was this increased amount of publicists representing artists around the world who don't have relationships, who aren't necessarily doing the best work, touring went to zero. So advertising budgets went to zero. So
Yeah,
websites started to shut down, and there's fewer and fewer websites. And now, because of advertising budgets being smaller, fewer and fewer websites are actually promoting artists organically. So the
yeah.
job of the publicist is even harder than it was before, but you also have an increase in publicists. So to your point, it's not the same as it was. You couldn't just go and say, I'm going to get a feature on Rolling Stone and that's going to be the best thing ever. You can pay Rolling Stone for a feature
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, exactly.
So who knows if it's organic or just paid placement?
Oh, and a lot of the big pieces that you see on all the major stars and all the major and all the major music magazines, they are paid for, It's like
Yeah,
boutique publicity paid for from the deep pockets of the major record companies.
absolutely. So there's so much to know. There's so much to be cautious of. Let me ask you this. We'll come back to the case and what happens if
Cool.
you win or lose and where it goes forward after the February 16th verdict. But you have something like I think it was 60 songs or 60 compositions in development now. Is that accurate?
I have my band, the Great American Robber Bands. We got a really good pedigree. We've got one of the greatest drummers in the world, Prairie Prince. You may have heard of him, founding member of the Tubes. He's been touring with Todd Rundgren for over 40 years. And my singing partner is Grace Slick, excuse me, Diana Mongano, who replaced Great Slick in the Jefferson Starship. So those are my band members. So that gives you an idea of what's going on.
Hmm.
But we've got at least 5 albums in the can, and right now, the plan is I'm gonna drop something here too, which I'm not sure if you heard, but as being one of the owners of Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell's estate, we found
Hmm.
the multi-track tapes for Noel Redding's unreleased 1970s solo album called Nervous Breakdown that has Jimi Hendrix on 3 tracks.
Wow.
How about that? And so we've gotten the multi-tracks. We had it, transferred to digital and restored, and it's been produced into a double deluxe edition, so we plan on putting that out in the aftermath of the case. But getting back to the Great American Robber Barons, we're planning on putting out the Great American Robber Barons double album
Mm.
with at the same time as Noel's solo album, Nervous Breakdown. But more to your point, We are right now we have 111 songs, okay?
Wow.
We have at least 5 albums already completed, and so I've sent the list over to Diana, and she's gonna help me pare that down. Because, like I said in some of my other interviews, or maybe even have said it to you on an email, nobody wants to hear a 5 CD box set by a group that is relatively unknown. Doesn't matter how good it is. Nobody's gonna have the time. Who are these guys? What is this? You know, a 5 CD box set. So we're in the process right now of editing that down to like the top 25, and there's some really great tracks in there. So, that's what's going on. But I'm continuing to write new material as a writer. When the inspiration and the muse hits, you gotta do something about it. And so,
Yeah.
but I tell you, the reason that we're sitting on this amount of stuff is that me and my business partners, we've been working on this Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell estate stuff for so long. We knew we could throw a new Great American Robber Barons album out there, but it wouldn't have the same impact that it would if we do it correctly, which is like using the publicity and the promotion that we're getting from the case to help, elevate us to the public and help with the promotion and publicity.
Yeah, I mean, that's smart. You're being strategic about the timing and the release. Let me ask you this though, like you've done so much at this point in your career. What is the trick for you for maintaining that mojo? Do you have a muse? Like how are you so prolific with not just your music, but your writing and everything else?
I have no idea, but you know what? Let me tell you how all of this started. When I was 10 years old, like I said, I grew up on military bases in Southern California at the height of the Vietnam War. I went and visited a young friend of mine, and his older brother had just seen Jimi Hendrix at the Anaheim Convention Center. This is like 1968, and he had a copy of Axis Bold as Love. So I looked at the photo of this guy, Jimi Hendrix, and I thought, I don't know what this guy does, but I want to be that. I want to be that guy. And
Mhm.
that when I was 10 years old, that's when I decided to become a professional musician. So you fast forward 25 years later, and I'm touring with Noel Redding. And then you fast forward another 20 years, and suddenly I own a company that owns Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding's estates, and we are challenging a major record company for 50% ownership of the copyright. So all of this has had a lot of momentum, and it's
Mhm.
really kept me focused. But what I can really say is for people to, like, never give up and to always be trying to learn something, to always be trying to push the ball forward, and I think I mentioned this earlier. We never got involved in this because of the money. I didn't think, "Oh, yeah, we're gonna do this. We're gonna sue this record company. I'm gonna make $4,000,000. I'm gonna buy a Lamborghini." That's not what this is all about. And to further what I'm getting out of this, all of these experiences, I've now have completed 2 Jimi Hendrix books. Also, further to your other point where you mentioned that somehow a producer of who'd you say it was?
I think I referenced the Scorpions. I could
Yeah,
be
yeah.
wrong.
About how, the Scorpions manager or producer owns the records, etcetera. So, the Jimi Hendrix book that I'm writing and have just finished, and we're also gonna be releasing the book with Nervous Breakdown and the news, fingers crossed, of a positive outcome with the trial settlement. The book that I'm writing is called The Last Rays of the New Rising Sun, Mike Jeffrey and the Final Reckoning of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. For the uninitiated out there, Michael Jeffrey was Jimi Hendrix's manager. And there's all sorts of terrible conspiracy theories that are flying around him. And what I've done through working on this court case, as well as my, like, 40 years plus as a Jimi Hendrix historian and collector, I've gotten my hands on some really amazing documents that completely dispel all of the conspiracy theories about Michael Jeffrey. The truth about Michael Jeffrey is that he turned Jimi Hendrix and The Experience into the biggest rock stars on earth. That's what he did. There's all these conspiracy theories that he was in the British Army and that he was a high-ranking MI5 British intelligence agent that masterminded the kidnapping and murder of Jimi Hendrix for a $2 million insurance policy. I'm the only Jimi Hendrix author so far, or collector or historian, that's gotten his hands on Michael Jeffrey's British Army records. And guess what? Guess what he had to do with British intelligence, Chris?
I'm guessing not very much.
Nothing. Close. Absolutely nothing. All these conspiracy theories about Mike Jeffrey, I'm fully exonerating him. Okay, the thing with Mike Jeffrey, this is how Mitch and Noel got ripped off. So we're going to segue into, the nuts and bolts of all that. They're in this huge band with Jimi Hendrix. They're selling millions of records. They've had 6 straight platinum albums all around the world. They're the highest earning touring band in the world. Suddenly, Jimi Hendrix dies unexpectedly in London without a will.
Mhm.
Talk about a shitstorm.
Yeah.
Okay, at that point, the record companies and the Hendrix estate attorneys start circling the wagons. They refuse to give Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding access to the documents that prove who they are and what they're owed. Next thing you know, Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding are suing Warner Brothers, the Hendrix estate, and Mike Jeffrey. What a surprise. They want to get paid.
Yeah.
En route to Noel Redding to give a deposition in Noel Redding's court case, Michael Jeffrey dies in a plane crash, and
Oh
they
my
never identify his body, and all the contracts disappeared. And that and the other thing with Mike Jeffrey, he never sat down for a filmed or recorded interview. So this guy is gone. All the contracts are gone. Mitchell and Redding are forced into signing away uh, what they should have gotten for, like, minuscule amounts. That's when the Mike Jeffrey conspiracy theories start. They never identified his body. He ripped off all the money and rode off into the sunset, and he'd had Jimi Hendrix, assassinated for his $2 million insurance policy.
I mean, even if part of that were correct from the outside looking in right now, it almost sounds like he's the patsy and someone else would have been, like, orchestrating that at a higher level than him.
Oh, yeah. So with Mike Jeffrey dying in 1973, that created the perfect storm for Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding to be completely screwed over and defrauded for everything. And without going into any more salacious detail, we've uncovered some other documents that even predate Jimi Hendrix being discovered in New York by Mike Jeffrey and Chas Chandler and taken to London, and once he hit London, he became an instant superstar. Like, at their second gig, you know, at the Speakeasy or Blazey's, all the Beatles are there, all the Rolling Stones there, all Cream's there, Jeff Beck's there, everybody's there. So he immediately became this huge they as the Experience immediately became the hottest thing going. But more to my point, we've uncovered documents from before Jimmy even going to London that prove his entire career was a crime scene from be
Wow.
and it still is. It is. That's why there's this trial. It's a crime scene. It's so fascinating because, and with all due respect to the Guess Who bands like the Guess Who or Steely Dan, who in their own right, they were big bands and they had huge hits and they sold millions of records, but every year you can imagine their catalog selling less and less because the kids of today, they're not buying Guess Who records or Steely Dan records, but they are still buying Jimi Hendrix records. So
Mhm.
so that's just, further pointing out how iconic this catalog is, and
Yeah.
it's so valuable. Jimmy's estate or yeah, his career and his catalog, it's the most, litigated estate of all time, and because he was such a prolific songwriter and recording artist, he's also the biggest posthumous artist of all time. He's put out like 400 official albums, and the litigation around his career dwarfs practically everything else. It's so prolific, all of it.
It's such a wild story. I remember seeing his, exhibit in Seattle at the, Modern Pop Museum down there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like the amount of information to go into, to dive into. I can't imagine how much you have to go through just to deal with the book.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to my question, it sounds like you discovered Jimmy at a young age, you fell in love with the music, you went into that industry, and that's what's led you down this path towards this case. Is there any part of your tenacity that comes from your upbringing? You mentioned a military home and how you were raised. Was
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Okay, so I touched briefly, my father was a career, military person. He joined the Marine Corps at the end of World War II, was in Okinawa, did a tour in Korea, 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a major in the United States Marine Corps. He was an infantry battalion attack commander. He was a bad dude, and he came back from Vietnam extremely PTSD damaged.
Mm,
We then moved to New Zealand. In effect, he he took the he brought the Vietnam War home with him, and he took it out on I have a twin brother who's now deceased, unfortunately. His name was Kevin, but my brother and I suffered abuse at the hands of our PTSD damaged father that you would never believe, and part of my resume is that I'm a published biographical author, and that my first book, it's called On My Own. It's
mm,
called On My Own. You can buy it hard copy on Amazon, and it details the outrageous abuse that my twin brother and I suffered at the hands of my PTSD damaged father. It led to my twin brother's complete mental breakdown and a very mysterious, disappearance. He wasn't found years later, and it completely destroyed his life. My
mm.
brother and I went through that when we were 18 years old, and that when I went through that with my father, something inside of me said, "If I can get over this, anything else that I go through in life is gonna be like a Sunday school picnic compared to what I'm
Mm.
going through now." And it also gave me tenacity and the will to, like, never give up, and something deep down inside of me told myself, "Stay strong, stay focused, never give up, and something really good is gonna happen as long as you stay honest and work hard and never give up." And that pretty much is what my first book is about.
I, apologize for not knowing that about the book. I made a note to go and grab that and check it out, but, thank you for sharing. That's heavy, but also answers the question of why you
Yeah,
are where you are, because
yeah.
what's the expression? Life's easy, it's just people that make it difficult, and I think that if we come to terms with ourselves and have a mindset that allows us to overcome things, the challenges might not be easier, but getting past them gets
No,
easier.
absolutely, and there's that other great saying, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family, you know?
Yeah.
You only get one set of parents, and unfortunately for me and my brother, I blame the Vietnam War. My father came back from the Vietnam War, and he was a fucking monster. Pardon
Mhm.
my French. He was just a monster, you know? And back in those days, in the mid-70s, people didn't know what PTSD was, you know?
Mhm.
And plus being a hardened Marine Corps career officer, you know, you've gotta show strength, you can't show weakness, you can't show
Um,
emotion, you gotta be a big tough guy and blah, 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 so anyway, that's what
well,
that was about.
that explains where some of your mindset comes from. Sadly, the music industry or entertainment industries at high levels have a lot of similarities, and there's so many stories of PTSD or being chewed up and spit out and
Yeah,
not knowing which way. I mean, look at Dave Chappelle and how he famously like fled. I think it was to South Africa, just
yeah, just to get away from it, and here he is, the biggest comedian on earth, and he's going, "I don't need this.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
need this. See you guys later. I'll come back again if I feel like it." Ha!
I mean, that's the thing is the system unfortunately needs a lot of people fighting for it. So kudos to you for championing that.
Thanks.
Um, I've got a few questions left and then I'll pass it to you to wrap up. But like, let's just go down that world of conspiracy for a second more. There are so many people that have talked about, that, for the industry, for labels, certain artists are better dead than alive because then we make more money, we sell more records, the catalog changes ownership. I'm not saying name names, but do you think there have been instances of artists throughout the years actually being murdered by the industry, so to speak?
You know what? I am a singer-songwriter in, like, the folk rock world. I pretty much write on the acoustic, but I got a full backing band. All you've gotta do and I by no means am I a hip hop or a rap aficionado or expert, but that to me is the one thing that stands out with that industry is the violence and how many huge stars have died, like, through gang violence or who are now in prison, you know? Like, just say with Jimmy, obviously, in his personal life, there was lots of drugs and there was lots of girls and there was lots of fun, but there weren't bodyguards with automatic weapons, and
Mhm.
he wasn't, like, pulling guns on people and shooting people and all of that stuff, so as far as Jimmy goes and the conspiracy theories, oh, yeah, Mike Jeffrey murdered Jimmy. Jimmy was worth more dead to alive than for Mike Jeffrey. It's a complete crock. Because let me tell you something, with Jimmy being the highest paid earning touring musician in the world, at the time of Jimmy's death, Mike Jeffrey and Jimi Hendrix, as well as the band's royalties, for the most part, were still on hold pending a previous lawsuit with a New York producer called Ed Chalpin. So the only revenue stream that Jimi Hendrix was generating for Mike Jeffrey and Chas Chandler was through their concert appearances. So
Mhm.
the idea that Jimmy was worth more dead than alive to Mike Jeffrey at the time is complete bollocks because that was the cash cow, the touring revenue, because the record royalty revenue was on hold pending these lawsuits. So that dispels that rumor and conspiracy theory right there.
So the record sales were or the revenue from the records were on hold, but the revenue ultimately was to the label?
No, the labels were holding it.
The labels were holding it.
Of course, they were selling the money. They were selling the records. It was all sitting there in escrow for them making, interest money. And this that the Jimi Hendrix business empire is so convoluted, Chris. Here's another example. Mike Jeffrey had representing Jimi Hendrix, had executed every one of his record contracts, first in England with Track and Polydor, and then with Warner Brothers, and then also with Barclays in France. And so Mike Jeffrey was the face to the record companies. So when Jimi Hendrix dies, and finally, right before he died, the record royalties started flowing in because these lawsuits had been completed. So Jimi Hendrix is dead without a will. Mike Jeffrey's the name on all the record contracts. He's getting all the money, and then he dies in a plane crash. And you can imagine what happened then. Jimi Hendrix's estate attorneys, they knew that Mike Jeffrey was the conduit for the royalties for all the record contracts, and now he's dead. And I've you can imagine these record companies just going, "All right,
Yeah.
nobody's in charge here. Jimmy's dead. He didn't sign the record contracts anyway. Mike Jeffrey's dead, and now he's dead. And these Jimi Hendrix estate attorneys, they don't know where to go. What are they gonna do? They're gonna call Polydor and go, da da da. I don't you know who I am? And they're gonna go, well, Mike Jeffrey signed the record contract. You got to talk to him. Oh, he's dead. Well, that's your problem. Why don't you go talk to his probate attorney or whatever it was? So
Well,
I've
I
seen
mean, so you said earlier in the conversation, follow the money. So like I would default to, did the labels kill them? Did the labels do this? Because if they have money sitting in escrow generating percentages,
that they ultimately they paid, but I've seen documents, part of our research, we've gotten our hands and we've gotten in front of all sorts of documents. Certain record companies, and I'm not gonna name I'm not gonna name them, they didn't come clean with any royalty checks. This is a major, major world record company until, like, 1978,
mm,
and only at that point did it take the Hendrix estate attorneys that long to get through everything to finally and Mike Jeffries' probate attorney finally got his hands on some of the money that was owed Mike Jeffrey. Like, we're talking 8 or 9 years later. So in other
mhm,
words, these major record companies are just selling millions of Jimi Hendrix records and what like I said before, they're just keeping the money
yeah,
until they have to, until, legally somebody puts a gun to their head and say, "Hey, where's the money?" And
yeah,
so and talking about more about my book, I'm gonna go into this. It's primarily this book is a full exoneration about Mike Jeffrey, and it's gonna really name the villains. Let me tell you, I told you from the beginning
mhm.
that the Jimi Hendrix business career or his music career, it's a crime scene from right from the beginning until now. And boy, are there some villains. There are some incredible villains in this. And let me tell you something, what all the villains had in common was that the first people they needed to get out of the way was Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding. Because I've seen Jimi Hendrix's probate accounting from February 1971. The major, um, the people who were owed the most were Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding. They had a 50% claim on all record royalties. They were like the major creditors, people that were owed. And so everybody that was concerned with the Jimi Hendrix business, the first thing they needed to do was get rid of Mitchell and Redding, and that's what they did.
It sounds like you have the makings of a very good documentary on your hands.
No, and yeah, and we're talking to BBC film people and obviously, like I said earlier, we knew that this was a big story because it's
Mhm.
about Jimi Hendrix ultimately and the recorded masters, and plus all the implications that it's gonna have on the future of the music industry. But again, there's that Jimi Hendrix magic thing, everybody is interested, everybody. And when we're putting everything behind the iconic Hendrix catalog, it just extrapolates the whole thing into being even more important than what we thought it was gonna be.
Absolutely. I mean, I even read that people within the legal spheres and the music industry are saying this is one of the most important legal battles in the music industry, period, so far.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is, and, there's a couple of quotes, this is a perfect quote where it says, "This is where the legacy analog musical world collides with the digital streaming world, and that is a great visual, right?
Absolutely.
The analog world, it's a collision, and that's why the Sony attorney said, "This is gonna destroy the music industry," and it's like, "You know what? Like, you agreed with me, it's about time." All of my musician friends in San Francisco, they're going, "This sounds like a really good idea."
Yeah.
Maybe maybe the musicians will finally get paid. As you know, the whole thing's a pecking order, right? The labels get paid, the
Mhm.
streaming people get platforms get paid, the accountants, the managers, the producers, the accountants, the lawyers, everybody gets paid. The songwriters get paid first by law. The songwriters get paid first, as you know. Who gets paid last? The people that make the music. Wouldn't it be wonderful just to turn this whole thing on its head and
Yeah.
have the people like, if you were a carpenter and you built houses, you'd get paid, right? You'd get paid.
Absolutely.
Get paid first probably, or you'd put your tools down and walk off the construction site. So look at the music industry. The people that make the music are the last to get paid. It's a
Yeah.
joke. It's a joke.
Well, they should be the first to get paid, right? The business gets paid first, and then the business is responsible for paying all the employees that the business has hired.
Right. Yeah, and that's a key word. These idiots, they should be working for us. We're the ones making the music. Why are they getting paid first? And
Well, I do.
why are we getting paid last or in some cases, like Mitch and Noel, not at all? Think
Yeah.
about what happened to them. Like, the last 30 years of their lives, every year, there'd be a new platinum Jimi Hendrix album, whether it was studio outtakes or some killer concert album. Their pictures, their names, their performances are splashed across albums that sell millions of copies, and they get nothing.
Yeah. Well, I definitely believe that you cannot have construction without destruction first. And I do also think that technology is one of the biggest disruptors. I mean, whether you love or hate ride sharing apps is not relevant. But if you look at where the cab or the taxi industry was before Uber came along, there were all kinds of monopolies and all kinds of things that were happening with how you got your license, etc. And that got nuked. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
yeah.
the industry that we love and that we're a part of and that we want to see benefit artists is going to get the ass whooping that it deserves in
Woo!
order for there to be a ground up built that is for the artist.
Yeah, I completely agree, and you know what? So many of my friends and, industry people I know, they are more optimistic than me, so we're remaining cautiously optimistic, but you know what? Throughout this case, the defendant, that's what I'm gonna call them, the
Yeah.
defendant, the defendant for 4 years tried to have our case dismissed. 4 times. They lost 4 motions to dismiss. They appealed 4 motions to dismiss. They lost 4 appeals. So something inside of me and my partners, we think, I don't how could we have gotten this far if we didn't really have a case, or how did we get this far if we were just gonna lose?
Hmm.
We're cautiously optimistic that, we couldn't have gotten it this far unless we were gonna get, a reasonable outcome for our efforts.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe it'll be one of the first and most important dominoes, and then other lawsuits, other companies, industries that are being examined, like, touring, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, maybe
Yeah.
maybe those will start to get their just desserts as well. Keith, I really, really appreciate your time, your honesty. Um, I love to always end with, a final word from my guests. So why don't you help me wrap things up by telling me and the listeners, like, what's one of the hardest lessons you've had to learn for your entire career so far?
Um, Beware of what you wish for because you might just get it. No, I'm only kidding. It's just like you can't give up. And I've said earlier in the program, I said, getting a record deal, having a hit is all wonderful, but it's not really a guarantee that you're gonna get paid, so
Mm.
you've just gotta stay focused, and you just gotta not ever give up. You just be tenacious, work hard, be honest, and here's the other thing for musicians and people in the music industry. If you're entering the music business thinking you're gonna make a bunch of money and become a rock star, you can't do that. If you're going into this for the money, you're doing the wrong it's the wrong reason to be doing this.